Most people imagine American intelligence as a single secretive agency working in the shadows. In reality, it is a sprawling national system made up of multiple organizations, separate departments, overlapping authorities, and highly specialized missions. What appears from the outside to be one hidden machine is actually a layered bureaucracy designed to collect, analyze, protect, and distribute information across nearly every level of the US government. At the center of that system is not just espionage, but division of labor. One agency focuses on human sources overseas. Another intercepts signals and encrypted communications. Another tracks threats inside the United States. Others map the globe, manage reconnaissance satellites, study foreign militaries, support diplomacy, or push homeland threat warnings down to local authorities. The real story is not simply about secrets, it is about structure. That structure exists because modern intelligence is too broad for any one institution to manage alone. The United States has to monitor military developments, political instability, cyber threats, covert networks, weapons programs, and emerging crises across every region of the world. It also has to separate foreign collection from domestic enforcement and technical surveillance from policy analysis. So instead of building one omnipotent service, Washington built an ecosystem. This is what gives the system its scale. Intelligence is not just gathered and stored. It is processed through a chain that includes collection, verification, interpretation, dissemination, and operational support. Satellites generate imagery. Analysts convert imagery into meaning. Field officers recruit sources. Cryptologic systems intercept traffic. Investigators track hostile activity at home. Each piece matters because raw access alone is useless without institutional mechanisms to interpret and act on it. That is the misconception at the heart of the American intelligence system. Its power does not come from a single agency. It comes from coordination between many of them, each built for a different environment, legal boundary, and operational task. And to understand how that machine actually works, the first thing to examine is not the spies. It is the architecture that decides who does what. To understand how this system functions, the first thing to examine is hierarchy. The American intelligence community is not a loose collection of secret officers operating independently. It is a formal structure of 18 organizations spread across the military, civilian departments, law enforcement, and national policy apparatus, all tied together by a coordinating framework designed to reduce fragmentation without eliminating specialization. At the top sits the Director of National Intelligence, a position created after the September 11th attacks exposed how dangerous poor coordination could be. Before that reform, agencies often held critical fragments of information without effectively integrating them into a common picture. The modern system was built to solve that problem. The DNI does not command every agency in the way a military officer commands troops, but the office sets priorities, oversees community-wide coordination, manages national intelligence programs, and tries to align collection with presidential and national security needs. Beneath that layer, the community divides broadly into functional and institutional blocks. There are civilian intelligence agencies such as the CIA, NSA, NGA, NRO, and DIA. There are intelligence arms inside cabinet departments, including state, energy, treasury, homeland security, and justice. Then there are the military service intelligence components, which support both battlefield commanders and the wider national intelligence system. Each belongs to the same ecosystem, but each answers through a different administrative chain. That distinction matters. An agency may be part of the intelligence community while still being controlled day to day by its parent department. The FBI, for example, contributes intelligence, but remains within the Department of Justice. The NSA supports national leaders, yet it also serves the Defense Department. This creates a system that is centralized in mission, but decentralized in control. That design is deliberate. It allows intelligence to support diplomats, presidents, war planners, investigators, and domestic security officials at the same time. But once authority is divided this way, the next question becomes unavoidable. How are missions divided so agencies do not all chase the same target in the same way? The answer begins with collection itself. To see how the system avoids duplication, it helps to look at the intelligence cycle from the front end. Not every agency exists to do the same kind of collection. The American model separates intelligence by method, environment, and legal authority. In other words, the question is not just what information is needed, but who is allowed and equipped to gather it. One of the clearest divisions is between human intelligence and technical intelligence. Human intelligence depends on people, recruited assets, diplomatic contacts, defectors, liaison relationships, and undercover networks. This is most closely associated with the CIA's overseas operations, where case officers develop sources who can provide access to decisions, intentions, and plans that cannot be captured by machines alone. A satellite can photograph a missile site. A human source may explain whether the missiles are operational, why they were moved, and what leadership intends to do next. Technical collection works differently. Signals intelligence, led primarily by the NSA, targets communications, electronic emissions, and data flows. Geospatial intelligence, centered on the NGA and supported by national reconnaissance systems, transforms imagery, mapping, and remote sensing into actionable understanding. Measurement and signature intelligence adds yet another layer, identifying specific physical traces such as radar profiles, heat patterns, or chemical indicators. These disciplines are less about individual informants and more about sensors, processing systems, and analytic interpretation at scale. A historical shift after the Cold War made this division even more important. Intelligence agencies no longer focused only on tracking rival superpower militaries. They had to monitor decentralized terrorist networks, cyber intrusions, covert finance, and weapons proliferation. That forced the system to blend old tradecraft with newer technical infrastructures, often against targets that moved faster and hid more effectively than traditional state adversaries. This is why the intelligence community is structured around collection disciplines rather than a single universal method. Different targets require different tools, and each tool comes with its own strengths, blind spots, and legal constraints. But once information is collected, another problem emerges. Raw material from dozens of channels means very little unless someone can turn it into judgment. That takes the system into its next layer, analysis. Once intelligence is collected, the system enters a less visible but equally decisive phase, analysis. This is where scattered fragments become usable judgment. A report from a human source, an intercepted communication, a satellite image, a financial transaction, and an embassy cable may all describe the same event from different angles. The analyst's job is to determine whether those fragments reinforce one another, contradict one another, or reveal something larger that none of them shows alone. This is why intelligence agencies are not just collection services. They are also interpretation engines. The CIA produces strategic assessments for national leadership. The DIA focuses heavily on foreign military capabilities and defense planning. The INR at the State Department brings a diplomatic lens, often challenging assumptions that look persuasive from a purely military or covert perspective. The FBI and DHS contribute domestic threat analysis, while Treasury analysts track illicit finance and sanctions evasion. The system works because analysis is distributed across institutions with different expertise, not concentrated in a single office. That diversity can be an advantage, but it also creates friction. Different agencies may interpret the same evidence differently because they serve different missions and decision-makers. One office may emphasize worst-case military intent. Another may highlight political constraints that make escalation less likely. That tension is not always a flaw. In many cases, it is how the system stress tests its own conclusions before those conclusions reach senior officials. The most visible product of this layer is the finished intelligence brief, a distilled assessment delivered to policymakers in a form they can act on quickly. But behind that polished document sits a far larger machinery of sourcing, confidence levels, competing hypotheses, and constant revision. Intelligence is rarely a perfect picture. It is a disciplined estimate built under uncertainty. This analytic layer became especially important after major failures revealed what happens when warning signs are not integrated properly. Information had often existed, but it had not been synthesized fast enough or shared broadly enough. That is why analysis is not just about understanding threats. It is about turning information into coordination. And to coordinate effectively, the system needs something even more difficult than collection or analysis. It needs rules for sharing secrets across bureaucratic boundaries. For all its technical sophistication, the intelligence system breaks down quickly if information stays trapped inside institutional silos. That is why one of its most important mechanisms is not spying or analysis, but dissemination. Intelligence only becomes strategically useful when it moves to the right office at the right clearance level in time for someone to act on it. This sounds straightforward, but in practice, it is one of the hardest problems in the entire system. Every agency protects sources and methods, often for good reason. A human source inside a hostile government cannot be exposed carelessly. A surveillance capability loses value if a target learns how it is being monitored. A cyber access point may take years to build and seconds to lose. So intelligence has to be shared selectively, even though the threats it describes often cross multiple bureaucratic boundaries. To manage that tension, the system relies on classification rules, compartmented access, fusion centers, interagency task forces, and secure reporting channels. Some intelligence is distributed widely in summarized form. Some is restricted to tightly controlled compartments, some is written for cabinet officials, while other reporting is tailored for investigators, combatant commands, or local security partners. The architecture of access is almost as important as the intelligence itself, because it determines who can connect one warning to another. The failures surrounding September 11th made this issue impossible to ignore. Different agencies possessed pieces of the picture, but the system did not move those pieces efficiently enough across organizational lines. In response, Washington expanded information-sharing structures, strengthened interagency coordination, and built new mechanisms to bridge the gap between foreign intelligence, domestic security, and law enforcement. The goal was not to erase secrecy, but to prevent fragmentation from becoming a national vulnerability. That reform changed the culture of intelligence as much as its paperwork. Agencies increasingly had to think not only about collecting secrets, but about how those secrets could be made operationally useful to partners with different missions. And once intelligence begins moving across the system in that way, the next layer comes into view: the legal boundaries that determine who can collect what, where, and against whom. To understand why the intelligence system is divided so carefully, it is necessary to look at law as much as capability. American intelligence is not organized only by mission. It is organized by jurisdiction. The central boundary running through the entire system is the distinction between foreign intelligence collection and domestic investigative authority, because the tools that are acceptable overseas are not automatically permissible inside the United States. This is where the architecture becomes more than administrative. The CIA is primarily a foreign intelligence service, and by statute and tradition does not operate as a domestic police force. The FBI, by contrast, has law enforcement authority inside the United States and also serves as a domestic intelligence actor in counterterrorism and counterintelligence. The NSA can collect foreign signals intelligence, but its activities are constrained by legal frameworks, oversight rules, and special procedures when U.S. persons could be involved. Homeland Security adds another layer, focused on warning, coordination, border security, and infrastructure protection rather than classic espionage. Those distinctions are the product of history. Investigations in the 1970s exposed surveillance abuses and pushed Congress to impose stronger oversight on intelligence activity. That led to permanent intelligence committees, new reporting requirements, Attorney General guidelines, and the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which created a legal process for certain national security surveillance activities. The point was not to stop intelligence collection. It was to define its boundaries within a constitutional system. In practice, this means agencies are constantly navigating two pressures at once. They are expected to move fast against espionage, terrorism, cyber threats, and foreign influence operations. At the same time, they must document authority, protect civil liberties, and justify intrusive methods through legal and bureaucratic review. Intelligence, in the American model, is not just a secret function. It is a regulated one. That legal framework shapes everything from warrants and minimization procedures to interagency coordination and congressional notification. It determines which office takes the lead, which tools can be used, and how information may be retained or shared. And once law defines the boundaries of action, the next question becomes practical. Who actually performs the work inside those boundaries, and how are those people trained for such different missions? Even the most elaborate intelligence structure is only as effective as the people operating inside it. After law defines the boundaries and agencies divide the mission space, the next layer is personnel: analysts, linguists, case officers, surveillance specialists, crypto logic experts, investigators, cyber operators, targeting officers, and technical engineers. The intelligence community is not built around a single professional type. It is a workforce system designed to combine very different forms of expertise under a common national security purpose. That diversity begins with recruitment. Some roles prioritize regional knowledge, foreign language ability, and cultural fluency. Others require advanced technical skills in mathematics, computer science, geospatial analysis, or engineering. Some positions demand the ability to write concise, strategic assessments for senior policymakers. Others depend on operating discreetly in difficult environments, managing classified systems, or detecting hostile intelligence activity inside the United States. In effect, the system recruits from multiple professions at once. Training follows the same logic. A CIA operations officer is not prepared in the same way as an NSA cryptologic analyst or an FBI counterintelligence agent. Each organization has its own pipeline, tradecraft standards, security protocols, and institutional culture. Yet all of them must learn how to handle classified material, work within legal constraints, assess source reliability, and contribute to a larger intelligence picture. The community depends on specialization, but it also depends on interoperability. The post-September 11th era accelerated this shift. Agencies needed people who could move across older bureaucratic lines, analysts who understood terrorism networks and finance, investigators who could coordinate with intelligence collectors, technical personnel who could operate in both cyber and traditional national security environments. Intelligence hiring became not just about secrecy, but about adaptability. That makes personnel policy a strategic issue, not a human resources detail. Retaining language experts, cyber talent, and experienced field officers is often as important as acquiring a new surveillance platform. Institutions can purchase technology, but they cannot quickly manufacture judgment, trust, or tradecraft. And this is where the system starts to reveal another dependency. Highly trained people still require vast technical support to extend their reach. Human expertise gives intelligence meaning, but scale comes from infrastructure. To make these missions possible, the community relies on an enormous apparatus of platforms, sensors, and classified technology. To understand how intelligence operates at national scale, it is necessary to examine the machinery behind it. The public often focuses on agents and analysts, but much of the real capability comes from systems most people never see. Satellites in orbit, secure communications networks, signals collection platforms, cyber infrastructure, data processing centers, airborne sensors, and global relay architecture that moves classified information across continents in near real time. This technical backbone is divided across specialized agencies. The National Reconnaissance Office manages many of the satellites that collect imagery and signals from space. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency converts location-based data, imagery, and mapping into usable intelligence for planners and operators. The National Security Agency runs vast signals, intelligence, and information assurance functions, processing immense volumes of electronic data while also helping secure government communications. These institutions do not simply gather information. They build and sustain the platforms that make modern intelligence possible. A major historical shift came with the fusion of digital surveillance, satellite reconnaissance, and networked analysis. During the Cold War, intelligence often depended on slower collection cycles and narrower technical channels. In the 21st century, agencies increasingly had to process continuous streams of data, communications metadata, remote imagery, cyber indicators, radar signatures, and geolocation patterns. The challenge stopped being access alone. It became filtering, prioritizing, and interpreting massive quantities of information without losing strategic clarity. That is why technical intelligence is as much about infrastructure as invention. A sensor is useless without launch capability, maintenance, ground stations, encryption, processing pipelines, and analysts trained to interpret its output. The intelligence community relies on a logistical ecosystem that resembles a hidden industrial network as much as a secret service. This infrastructure gives the United States global reach. It allows national leaders to monitor military movements, missile activity, electronic emissions, maritime traffic, and crisis zones far from American territory. But technical reach creates its own limitation. Sensors can detect patterns, movements, and signals, yet they often cannot fully explain intent. To understand what adversaries mean to do, Intelligence requires something no machine can provide on its own: counterintelligence, deception detection, and the ability to see through what targets want the system to believe. The more advanced an intelligence system becomes, the more it has to assume that someone is trying to manipulate it. This is the domain of counterintelligence, one of the least visible but most essential layers in the entire architecture. If collection gathers secrets and analysis interprets them, counterintelligence protects the system from being penetrated, deceived, or quietly redirected by hostile actors. At its simplest, counterintelligence is defense against foreign intelligence services. In practice, it is much broader. It involves detecting espionage, identifying insider threats, uncovering covert influence, securing classified programs, and monitoring how adversaries attempt to map American capabilities. The FBI leads much of this work inside the United States, especially in cases involving espionage, clandestine foreign activity, or efforts to recruit officials, contractors, and researchers. Other agencies run their own internal security and counterintelligence elements to protect personnel, facilities, and sensitive operations. This mission matters because intelligence systems are unusually vulnerable to deception. An adversary can feed false reporting through a double agent, conceal the real purpose of a weapons program, mask military movements, or use cyber intrusions to learn what the United States is watching. A service that collects aggressively but defends poorly can become predictable. Worse, it can become confident in information that was deliberately shaped by an opponent. The Cold War provided repeated examples of this danger, from penetrations by hostile moles to elaborate denial and deception campaigns designed to distort Western assessments. In the digital era, the challenge expanded. Now the system must also track cyber espionage, data theft, influence operations, and attempts to exploit academic, commercial, and technological openness. Counterintelligence is no longer just about catching a spy in a trench coat. It is about protecting a vast national security network against quiet, persistent compromise. This makes counterintelligence both defensive and diagnostic. It does not simply block access. It helps determine whether the information entering the system can be trusted at all. And once trust becomes the central issue, the next structural layer comes into focus. The agencies that turn intelligence from passive understanding into direct operational support for military force, covert action, and national decision-making. Intelligence does not exist only to inform. At key moments, it is designed to enable action. This is where the architecture connects to operations, military planning, covert activity, crisis response, targeting, and strategic decision-making. The public often treats intelligence as a world of reports and briefings, but much of its real value lies in how it supports institutions that must act under pressure, often with incomplete information and very little time. One major branch of this function runs through the Department of Defense. The Defense Intelligence Agency, Service Intelligence Components, NGA, NSA, and other specialized bodies help translate information into operational advantage for combatant commands. That may involve identifying air defense systems before a strike, mapping terrain for special operations forces, monitoring troop movements, tracking maritime activity, or providing warning of missile launches. Intelligence in this context is not abstract. It is embedded in the logistical and command framework of military power. A separate but related branch lies in covert action and sensitive national missions. The CIA's role is not limited to gathering information from human sources. Under presidential authorization and legal oversight, it may also support activities designed to shape conditions abroad in ways that remain deniable or tightly controlled. This has historically included support to partner forces, political influence efforts, and other measures that sit between diplomacy and open military intervention. These operations are rare compared with routine intelligence work, but they illustrate an important principle. Intelligence can be both observational and operational. The campaign against transnational terrorism made this integration especially visible. Intelligence agencies and military commands increasingly worked in fused structures where surveillance, targeting, analysis, and operational execution were closely linked. The old separation between finding a threat and acting on it became thinner, particularly when time-sensitive targets were involved. That shift revealed the real function of intelligence in national power. It does not simply describe the world. It helps governments decide where to apply force, where to avoid escalation, and how to act with precision rather than guesswork. But none of that is possible without a quieter foundation underneath it all. Money, procurement, and the classified budget system that keeps the entire machine running. To outsiders, intelligence can look like an unlimited secret capability. In reality, it is constrained by budgets, procurement cycles, contracting systems, and the constant trade-off between present operations and future capability. The intelligence community is not sustained only by secrecy. It is sustained by an enormous financial architecture that funds satellites, data centers, technical research, secure facilities, training pipelines, and a workforce built to operate over decades rather than news cycles. This is where the system becomes institutional in the deepest sense. Intelligence agencies do not simply receive money and spend it freely. Funding is split across national and military intelligence programs, appropriated through classified and semi-classified processes, and distributed through oversight frameworks that attempt to protect secrecy without eliminating accountability. Congress may not discuss every line in public, but budgets still shape what the community can prioritize, how quickly it can modernize, and which threats receive sustained attention. Procurement is especially important because many intelligence capabilities take years to build. A reconnaissance satellite, a secure cloud architecture, a crypto-logic platform, or an advanced analytic environment cannot be improvised in a crisis. These are long-cycle investments requiring contractors, research institutions, launch schedules, maintenance systems, and protected industrial capacity. When intelligence works well, much of its effectiveness comes from decisions made years earlier in budget planning rooms rather than field operations. The post-September 11th environment demonstrated how funding priorities can reshape the community. Counterterrorism, surveillance integration, language capacity, watchlisting systems, and expeditionary support structures expanded rapidly. Later, strategic competition with major powers pushed attention back towards cyber defense, space-based systems, advanced encryption, supply chain security, and high-end military intelligence. Budgeting, in other words, is not just accounting. It is strategy translated into institutional endurance. This matters because every intelligence priority eventually becomes a resource question. Which regions receive more analysts? Which technical systems get replaced? Which threats justify new collection programs? Money determines not only what the community can do now, but what kind of intelligence system will exist 10 years from now. And once resources shape capability at that scale, the final layer becomes clear: how this entire structure fits into the broader geopolitical environment it was built to navigate. By this stage, the intelligence community looks less like a collection of agencies and more like a permanent operating system for American power. Its job is not merely to discover secrets, but to help the United States navigate a world defined by competition, uncertainty, and constant technological change. Intelligence supports diplomacy, military deterrence, economic policy, sanctions enforcement, cybersecurity, counterproliferation, and homeland defense all at once. That breadth is what makes it so central to modern statecraft. This wider geopolitical role became especially clear after the unipolar moment faded. For a time, the United States could focus heavily on terrorism and irregular threats. But as strategic competition intensified, intelligence had to rebalance toward rival states with advanced militaries, cyber capabilities, anti-satellite systems, covert influence tools, and global industrial reach. The community now has to monitor not just insurgent networks or isolated weapons programs, but sophisticated national systems that can operate across space, finance, information, and infrastructure simultaneously. That shift changes the meaning of intelligence. It is no longer enough to count missiles or intercept communications in isolation. Agencies must understand supply chains, emerging technologies, rare earth dependencies, semiconductor controls, disinformation campaigns, maritime choke points, and dual-use research. Strategic warning now depends on seeing how political intent, military modernization, and economic leverage fit together. In this environment, intelligence becomes a bridge between security policy and the broader architecture of national competition. A clear example is cyber conflict. A malicious intrusion may begin as a technical event, but its implications can extend into defense readiness, private industry, public confidence, and international signaling. The same is true of satellite interference, export controls, or covert financial networks. Modern intelligence, therefore, has to work across boundaries that older bureaucratic models treated separately. This is why the community continues to expand its partnerships with the military, law enforcement, diplomats, and allied governments. No single agency can map the full strategic environment alone. But the more intelligence becomes integrated with every layer of competition, the more it must answer an even bigger question. How does a system built for secrecy adapt to an era where power is increasingly contested in public, digital, and globally networked space? The final structural layer is adaptation. Intelligence systems are built to protect secrets, preserve sources, and reduce uncertainty for decision-makers. But the environment surrounding them is changing faster than the institutions were originally designed to move. Rival states operate through cyber campaigns, commercial technology, proxy networks, information operations, and deniable economic pressure. At the same time, vast quantities of relevant data now exist outside traditional classified channels, in public networks, private platforms, and globally distributed infrastructure. This creates a strategic tension. The intelligence community still depends on secrecy, compartmentation, and controlled access. Yet many of the most important modern indicators now appear in open-source data, commercial satellite imagery, public shipping records, financial disclosures, social media ecosystems, and digital exhaust generated far beyond government systems. The problem is no longer just how to steal secrets from closed societies. It is how to combine secret intelligence with public information fast enough to understand events before they harden into crises. A visible shift in recent years has been the growing institutional importance of open-source analysis, commercial collection, data integration, and artificial intelligence-assisted processing. These tools do not replace traditional espionage or signals collection. They change the tempo. They allow agencies to compare classified reporting against publicly observable patterns, identify anomalies faster, and produce warning without relying on a single channel. In effect, the community is learning that competitive advantage may come not only from access, but from synthesis. That transition also raises new vulnerabilities. Public exposure can compromise narratives. Commercial systems can be targeted or manipulated. Digital abundance can create noise as easily as clarity. And the more intelligence agencies interact with private sector technology and globally networked data, the harder it becomes to maintain the old boundary between secret collection and contested public space. So the future challenge is not simply whether the intelligence community can gather more information. It is whether it can adapt its methods, legal frameworks, and trained institutional habits to a world where secrecy is still essential but no longer sufficient. And that leads directly to the larger conclusion: what this system ultimately is and why its role is likely to become even more central in the years ahead. What emerges from all of this is a clearer picture of what American intelligence actually is. It is not a single agency, a single mission, or a single type of secrecy. It is a coordinated national system designed to reduce uncertainty for the United States across war, diplomacy, internal security, technological competition, and geopolitical risk. Its real strength lies less in any one operation than in the institutional ability to combine specialized functions into a continuous strategic capability. That is why the intelligence community matters far beyond espionage in the cinematic sense. It helps presidents and cabinet officials assess foreign intentions. It gives military commanders warning and targeting support. It helps investigators track espionage and covert networks at home. It supports sanctions, cyber defense, counterproliferation, infrastructure protection, and alliance coordination. In practical terms, it is one of the core mechanisms through which the US state perceives the outside world. But that role also defines its future challenges. The community must adapt to great power competition without losing the flexibility it built during the counterterrorism era. It must absorb artificial intelligence, commercial data, and open-source intelligence without overwhelming analysts in noise. It must defend its own networks while monitoring increasingly sophisticated cyber and space threats. It must share information faster across agencies and with allies, while still protecting sensitive sources and legal safeguards. Just as importantly, it must preserve legitimacy. In a constitutional system, intelligence cannot rely on secrecy alone. It has to operate under oversight, legal boundaries, and public trust strong enough to sustain long-term missions that citizens will never fully see. That tension will not disappear. It is built into the design. So the strategic reality is this: the American intelligence community is best understood not as a hidden empire, but as an adaptive sensor network for national power. Its purpose is to collect fragments, test them against one another, and convert them into foresight. In a world of faster crises, blurred boundaries, and constant competition, that function is only becoming more important. The future of intelligence will depend on whether this system can remain coordinated, lawful, and analytically sharp in an environment where the volume of information keeps rising, but certainty never does.